Hi all, Dave here, and this is the new trail super shoe from Adidas, the Adidas Terrex Agravic Speed Ultra. You'll have to excuse me for not cleaning these properly, but I guess they are trail shoes after all. I've done 2 runs in this shoe so far. One of them was a 54-mile race, so I did get to know this shoe quite well, but as I'll go on to a bit later in this video, a lot of that race was in mud. So today I'll share my initial impressions of the Agravic Speed Ultra, and once I do some more runs in hopefully drier terrain, I'll do a full review so I can get a more rounded opinion of how this shoe performed. Before we get into the different components of the Agravic Speed Ultra, let's just take a look at the ethos and basic specs of this shoe quickly. The Adidas Terrex Agravic Speed Ultra is a brand new shoe in Adidas's trail lineup, and Adidas have designed this shoe for all-out speed. Think of it as Adidas's answer to Nike's Ultrafly. Adidas's previous trail shoes have never really excited me that much. They always seemed a bit outdated and not very popular compared to their road shoe lineup. But when I heard Adidas were making an all-out trail super shoe, I couldn't pass them up. Of course, these are not just Adios Pro 3s with a trail tread on them. A lot more work has gone into these to make these suitable for the trails. Specs wise, the stack height according to Adidas's website shows 42mm at the heel and 34mm at the forefoot. Although I was a little confused by this, as some other reviews have the stack height as 38 in the heel and 30mm in the forefoot. Regardless, there's plenty of height in the midsole here, and there's an 8mm drop between the heel and the forefoot. All that stack hasn't dramatically impacted the weight though, as this is actually one of the lightest trail shoes I've ever tried. In my size 10.5 UK, it weighs in at 288 grams. That's even less than the Brooks Catamount 3s, which I tested earlier this year. Sizing wise, it is a little bit strange. There's decent amount of space here in the toe box for me, but it does feel pretty narrow here across the midfoot. Luckily for me, it's mainly the toe box area where I need the space. The rest of my foot is pretty narrow, so I didn't have too many issues here, but it might be less comfortable for people with wider midfoots. Where I did have an issue though is the heel lock, specifically on my right foot. I was getting a fair amount of heel slippage, but only on the right side, which is pretty strange. I've never seen that before. Once trying a runner's knot, it did get a little bit better, but I was still experiencing a fair amount of heel slippage. It might be something to do with the fact the heel counter has no padding here whatsoever, so it doesn't feel like there's a lot for my heel to grip onto. Regardless, I still completed the 54-mile ultramarathon in them without any pain in the heel, so I can't say it impacted me that much overall, but it might just be something to watch out for. Lastly, for spec, price-wise, these are not cheap shoes. They come in at £200, but in comparison, it's £30 cheaper than Nike's equivalent of this shoe, the Ultrafly. It's also cheaper than a lot of other road super shoes out there as well. So all in all, I think it's about the right price if you want to pay for a top-tier trail shoe. Now that we've been over the basic specs, let's just get into a bit more detail about the construction and what I thought about the Agravic Speed Ultra. Let's just start with the upper and then work our way down. The upper is made up of a seamless synthetic mesh that's also really thin, but it's pretty abrasion resistant at the same time. This overlay extends all around the base of the upper and all the way to the back of the heel. And these overlays, along with the relatively large stack height of the shoe, means you can actually go through some pretty deep puddles and bits of mud without getting your feet too wet. Although the upper is pretty sturdy and doesn't seem to expand that much, I think there's enough material there in the toe box to accommodate most feet. So personally, I haven't been too worried about blisters. In fact, I didn't get a single blister in my 54-mile race, which is definitely a first for me. Moving back to the heel, there's a bit of stiffness in the heel counter to add a touch of stability, although it is fairly minimal. Inside the heel counter itself, there is hardly any padding. There's just 2 small strips that cover the ankle area, but nothing for the heel itself. This has led to some heel slippage for me even with a runner's knot. It's definitely an area which I think Adidas need to fix, even if it does add a little bit more weight. Lastly, on the upper, let's look at the laces and then the tongue. Normally I don't mention the laces on shoes, but on the Terrex Agravic Speed Ultra, they're made out of this super grippy textured material, similar to what Nike use on their super shoes. It means that it's pretty effortless to tie, and once you've got the lockdown you want, you won't have any trouble with the laces becoming loose. The tongue is fully gusseted and hugs the midfoot quite nicely. However, I have noticed the tongue is quite short, especially when trying to use a runner's knot. That does put unnecessary strain on the top of my foot from the laces, and I think this is another area where I'd like to see Adidas improve. Okay, so let's move on to the real talking point since this shoe was announced, and that is the midsole. The Adidas Terrex Agravic Speed Ultra uses Adidas's top tier Light Strike Pro foam in the midsole. 2 layers of it actually. It's the same foam used in the Adios Pro and Prime X series of super shoes for the road. And considering how popular Adidas's road lineup of race shoes has been, there's been a lot of hype in seeing what a full Light Strike Pro midsole might look like on a trail shoe. Now, it might just be me, but the Light Strike Pro foam used here in the Agravic Speed Ultra feels a tad firmer than its road-going counterparts. They might have just done this to add a little bit of stability, as you don't really want a wobbly shoe on the trails. In between these 2 layers of Light Strike Pro, Adidas have also stuck in a unique energy rod system, which they've specifically developed for the trails. Unlike their road shoes, the Agravic Speed Ultra doesn't use carbon energy rods, they use P-bax prongs. 4 towards the forefoot and 2 running back towards the heel. This adds a bit of stability to the midsole as well as some propulsion. The fact Adidas also use energy rods which can move independently from one another, instead of a full-length carbon plate, means the shoe feels a lot more stable on the trails. There's less drastic lateral movement when you're running on off-camber trails, for example, as the plastic energy rods allow the midsole to flex and mold to the ground. Lastly, aside from the materials in the midsole, the actual shape of it is a unique feature as well. It's probably one of the most rockered shoe designs I've ever seen. So much so that it actually feels weird leaning back on my heels. And it feels like the maximum stack of the shoe is under the midfoot area instead of in the heel. The rocker is designed to try and transition you through your gait cycle efficiently and onto the forefoot for toe off as quick as possible. The rocker design also helps with running uphill, where the pre-curved midsole naturally just digs in and helps propel you upwards. Okay, so lastly for the technical stuff, let's just take a look at the outsole. The Agravic Speed Ultra comes with a continental outsole. I think this is an area where Adidas have tried to shave some grams off the shoe. The lugs around the outside of the outsole are 3mm, while down the middle the lugs get a bit shorter, down to 2.5mm. So overall it's not the most aggressive outsole, but it works well enough on dry trails. When trail conditions get a bit wet and sloppy, however, this isn't really the shoe you want to be using. If you do get caught out in the mud though, the actual surface area of the shoe here helps a bit. The forefoot is so wide that I found in some cases it was helping me across boggy surfaces, as I wasn't really sinking in much. Overall though, this shoe is best used on dry, smooth trails. Now the tech specs are out of the way, what did I actually think about the Adidas Terrex Speed Ultra after my first 2 runs and 60 miles? As you might have guessed, there are some things I'm loving about this shoe and other things which haven't been too great for me so far. I'm loving the combination of lightness, energy return from that Light Strike Pro midsole and the rockered shape of the shoe. This combination just makes it feel like I'm gliding over the trails at quite a surprisingly quick pace compared to the effort I'm putting in. I can't say I can feel that plastic plate doing too much in the midsole, but it must be doing something to aid with that pace. Or it could just be the properties of the Light Strike Pro shining through. Regardless, the ride feels great. The rockered design feels like it's trying to get me transitioning to the forefoot for toe off very quickly, which probably adds to that feeling of speed, which I guess is ultimately the ethos of the Agravic Speed Ultra. Another plus about the ride is the stability I've experienced from the midsole. I think this is partly due to the Light Strike Pro being a bit firmer than its road-going counterpart, but it's mostly down to the width of the shoe in the forefoot. As long as you land in the midfoot or forefoot area, I think this is quite a stable shoe out there on the trails. However, there is still a considerable amount of stack height here, so ground feel is probably not the best. So for any technical trails, I'd probably wear something else with a lower stack height. For the negatives, I have to talk about the upper. I love that there's plenty of width here in the toe box, but going towards the back of the shoe is where I started finding issues during my runs. For a start, the tongue feels too short for me. It's also pretty thin, so when I've been lacing up the shoe pretty tight, it feels like the laces are just cutting into the top of my foot. Not what you really want for longer distance running. And you need to tie these laces up pretty tight from my experiences so far. There's no grip whatsoever in the heel to lock your heel in. This has led me to experience some heel slippage during my runs. And I think all they would have had to have done to solve this is add a little thin strip of padding across the top of the heel counter. It wouldn't have added much weight, but it could have just fixed these heel lock issues that I'm having. Overall though, I'm really pleased with the Agravic Speed Ultras so far. Even with the issues I've been having with the upper, the ride more than makes up for it in my opinion. I haven't ran on the trails in anything quite like it before. And I'm looking forward to maybe using these in some more races to experience if they work over that 100-mile ultra distance. I will be sure to do a full review with that feedback later on. But for now, this has been my first impressions on the Adidas Terrex Agravic Speed Ultra. And for now, I'm glad I don't have to keep saying the name of this shoe anymore. I hope you enjoyed the review. Please give me a like or a sub if you enjoyed the video. And if you have any questions, please ask away.